Stop about 100 yards. They'll say, thank you very much. We give up. Chile, please go to Cuba, which we will be taking over. What we'll do on the way back, Iran, we'll have one of our big, maybe the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier, the biggest in the world. Stop about 100 yards offshore. They'll say, thank you very much. We give up. Chile, please go to Cuba. Okay, so that is President Trump's, what should I say, agenda for Cuba, right? He is bent that he is going to control, he is going to take over Cuba. Now, Cuba has been a revolutionary country since 1959, maybe throughout its entire history. However, we tend to think about and speak more about the Cuban Revolution that started in 1959 and is still in earnest. But President Trump is bent, he's determined that he is going to overthrow that, what you call it now, revolution. Now, we've been looking at since last Saturday, USS Nimitz in Jamaica. The Caribbean rejects a US invasion of Cuba. And if you love Cuba, then you will share this video and you will like it and you will send it to everybody. And we probably can have it as a petition that the entire Caribbean region rejects a US invasion of Cuba. Now, you and I might not be in agreement with some of what is happening in Cuba, some of the economic policies and the lot. But certainly we can agree that Cuba is of no threat to the United States, neither to any country in the region. We can agree on that because Cuba has lived with us. We have lived with Cuba all over the years. But if you should examine the playbook that the United States used against Venezuela, then we'll understand that this is a similar playbook that the United States is using against Cuba. And I did caution you, those of you on this platform, those of you who have been supporting me and listening to me, that Jamaica was going to be the same as Trinidad was in the case of Venezuela, that Jamaica was eventually going to capitulate to US pressure to invade Cuba. And when there was this spat between the Republican leader there in Congress and Andrew Holness, based on what Andrew Holness said some months ago, some of you, were defending Andrew Holness, or some of you were speaking against him and the fact that he was on board with, he was pretending as if he was on board with Cuba. He was in solidarity with Cuba because that was what earned him the angst, the ire of this congressman in Congress suggesting that Andrew Holness, is supporting Cuba because he suggested that he wanted it to be peacefully resolved. But behind the scenes, this is not what we see. And many people are finding it very difficult to understand what happens, what they see in public versus what they see behind the scenes. And you come with all your narratives and your stories about what Andrew Holness is doing or what he's not doing. The important thing is that you're able to recognize what is happening behind the scenes and you understand how systems of power work. I have been telling you that you are not going to understand geopolitics until you understand systems of power. And many of you are sending to me, and I appreciate it, great video, great presentation, and all of that stuff. But I understand too that many of you still do not understand what systems of power mean. You think that you understand, but you don't, right? And this is what we have to do. We have to now humble ourselves and try to see how we can understand how this world is interconnected, right? Because it's more interconnected than we think it really is. And people who we think are our friends or allies are really our enemies. And some of the people that we regard as our enemies might be our friends, might be the ones who are telling us the truth, but we don't want to hear it. Okay, and that is why many of us, the large majority of the Earth's population, will be deceived. PhDs and non-PhDs will be deceived because it's a system that seeks to deceive us. And President Trump is not, he's not the only person, he's not the only actor in wanting
to Cuba to be dethroned. And yesterday or last night, particularly, I was listening to a video done by these YouTubers. You have some interesting videos on YouTube, right? The majority of them are not. They're just shouting, and they're not giving you a deep understanding of what is happening in the world. But they were having a conversation on Daniel 11, the book of Daniel in the Bible, and the prophetic what should I say, revelations, and the history that they went into, and the analysis, just to give you the gist of what they were discussing, was that eventually atheism is going to be totally eradicated from the face of the earth. Now, it is not that people are going to accept democratically that they want, or freely, I should say, that they do not believe in God or they don't believe in any deity, so to speak. It is that you will be forced, and that is through the mark of the beast. So the king of the north is seeking Revelation, not Daniel 11 speaks about the king of the north and the king of the south. The king of the south represents that form of atheism, and the king of the north, which represents a false system of worship, which is going to invoke a false system that you and your children will have to adore. Now, it is every man and woman, just like the pandemic. You will have to make your decision whether or not you are going to accept that form of worship. And many people will, including those who understand that it might be false, but it's either you're going to get the mark of the beast in your what? In your head or in your right hand. And for those of us who understand the scriptures, we understand that the mark, when we talk about the forehead, it means the system where you make your decision, the frontal lobe of the brain. So every information you're gathering now, and you need to get into an understanding of biblical prophecy, because a lot of what is happening in Cuba and around the world becomes so clear to you. You won't understand everything because the biblical prophecy is so deep that it's going to take eternity. I mean, people have been, writing scholarly papers on Daniel 11, and we still do not have an exhaustive understanding of what that book is representing. So whilst we're watching, we know that the United States is going to come out the victor, whether you like it or not. Okay, it is not my here to say that I'm not on US in terms of its aggression, but the Bible did say clearly that this lamb-like beast which represents the United States, is going to speak like a dragon eventually. Because it started out like a lamb with the Constitution suggesting that it believes in democracy, it believes in freedom, freedom for all peoples. But we know no sooner had they begun that project, that experiment, that the United States started slavery. And no sooner had slavery ended, the United States began also a new form of slavery through segregation and the laws that it created therefrom. Okay, the Jim Crow laws, more specifically. So the United States, throughout the years, has always demonstrated that it is, in fact, a beast, but it behaved like a lamb. That lamb-like beast, the United States of America, is going to be transformed into a dragon. And a dragon in biblical prophecy, in the Bible in general, represents the devil himself. There is no good in that particular power. Now, we ought not to deny that the United States, in its lamb-like, beast-like appearance, has offered the world some great successes. Okay? We can't deny that. But we must also be able to understand the other phase that it is now transitioning into. And you and I, no matter what we think, no matter what, if you're religious or not, you cannot deny God's brilliance and his wisdom in terms of letting us understand years in advance, centuries in advance, that this power is going to have, specifically referring to the United States, is going to have this amount of power unto itself that it is going to cause the entire world to wander after the first beast, which of course many scholars have identified, including the Vatican itself, as the Roman Catholic papacy. Okay, even there are scholars. I told you about Malachi Martin. Malachi Martin spoke about communism. He spoke about communism in Russia, the Soviet communism. He spoke about US form of capitalism and also the Vatican as a religious, and he used the word geo-religious empire, because that is what the Vatican is. And that is why the Pope has his encyclical. You're hearing them, you're seeing them all around the world. And he's speaking as if he is the president of the world. But many of you are not following what needs to be followed. And I see some of the things you're watching, some of you share some of the things you're watching, and they're just so superficial. It is nothing to nothing. They're just reactionary videos. You don't really understand that what is happening in the world is not just a one-man show. This is a system of which men and women operate, in which they operate, and Trump is operating within that system. And if he does not do what the system desires, they can get rid of him or remove him. Okay? And that is what we have to understand. Okay? This is what we have to understand. Now, as we see it in Cuba, what is happening in Cuba right now, okay, we understand. Those of us who understand prophecy, those of us who understand history, because that's what, prophecy is all about, years ago when people talked about Revelation and Daniel, when I was a child, I thought that these were very complicated books to understand, to comprehend, as it were. But as you grew older and you began to study history, you realize how prophecy is so intertwined. It is really history being unfolded, but history seen in present, in the past, and the future, if you understand what I mean. So history in biblical context is not just what happened in the past. It's what is also happening as a result of what happened in the past, how it impacts our present lives, and the Bible gives us a narrow window into the future. Very narrow window. And that is why we have to study it. And from that perspective, from that prophetic historical perspective, we understand that Cuba is going to fall, right? Communism, atheistic communism, is going to be eradicated. Now, it will be replaced by a false system of freedom. That's what we also have to understand. It is not that one is being replaced and a better system is going to now control Cuba. It's going to be a system that is going to enslave them also. Because the people of the world, these billionaires and these people that control the world, and remember now that I am talking to you and many of you are not understanding, they exist in both the physical and the spiritual worlds. And that's why we have what we call secret societies. And you will be surprised at some of the things that these people do when they are in secret societies. Some of the people that you never think, you never attach or associate religion with them. Yesterday, I was also rereading, I should say, because I've read it several times, but the chapter on the Vatican in world politics and the US and the Vatican. And when he talked about Hollywood and how the Vatican controls Hollywood, you would never look at Hollywood and associate Hollywood with a religious empire, would you? No, because you think that it's a secular institution where people just go to watch some movies and you sit down, you and your children, and you consume movies that are actually brainwashing your minds. And you have absolutely no idea of the powers behind the creation of that movie. Okay, but in the book, Avril Manhattan suggested, not only suggested, but he intimated, because that is what happened. It's there in history. Okay, that the whole Hollywood system, the whole system of Hollywood is controlled by the Vatican. Controlled by the Vatican. And he suggested that no movie that you watch cannot be published until the Vatican gives its approval. Right? The Vatican has to give its approval to any movie in Hollywood that is actually published, okay, for you to view. And many of you don't understand these things. You think that the world is some simple thing and it's black and white, and you have some white people working against black people, and if those white people should go, then we'd live in a world of peace. But the world is more textured and nuanced than you really think it is. And many of you are looking at the world from a materialist, physical perspective, when, as the Bible suggests, our war is not with physical beings, but it's a spiritual war. We're wrestling against powers, principalities, and powers in high places, in very dark places too. And I did suggest on the live that I had recently that many of you should go and view the video of, and he has several videos out there of Estevan, Gabriel Estevan, because he is quite knowledgeable of the spiritual realm in which he existed in Angola. He's from Angola. And he, of course, had a testimony in which he suggested that his mother was barren, couldn't have any children, and that, but his father, who was an African tribal priest, and that's the voodoo priest, that a priest that was satanist, who believed in Satanism and went to satanic church, and he was, connected with that spiritual movement, secretive movement. But the secret societies are the same. Right? The secret societies, many of the Freemasons, all of them, they do not understand it until they get to the highest level. Okay? But the fact of the matter is, the fact I'm trying to bring to your attention here in this afternoon's program is that we are living in a highly deceptive age where people don't understand. They don't really understand what the world is about. Right? You think that presidents go and presidents come, and you're expecting that some president is going to bring what you call it, peace and prosperity to you. But they're not going to do that, because you're living in a wicked world, and you are living in a world that is controlled by wicked forces. Whether you see them, some of them can be seen, and the majority of them cannot be seen. And that is what you have to understand. And it is very painful for me to watch as I upload videos after videos to see that many people still do not comprehend what these videos are about. Still do not comprehend. And some of you, I must say, don't want to comprehend because, again, you think you know. But let me say something to you. You have seen what happened in Venezuela, right? I predicted what was going to happen in Venezuela. I told you that the United States was going to get Maduro out. I told you that it was going to happen. Did I want it to happen? No. Oh, no, it's not going to happen. You are on the side of the United States. I am not on the United States side, and it's aggression, it's military aggression around the world. That is why I have formed, that is why I actually made the channel to inform you that a lot of what you're hearing in the independent media ecosystem, and as well as mainstream media ecosystem, was nonsense and was not giving you the full truth. But much of it is half truth. They're not getting at the root of the problem. But many of you still, you don't want to listen, do you? Okay? So we're seeing now that the US Nimitz is in Jamaica, arrived yesterday. And the question is, why is the USS Nimitz in Jamaica? And what message does it send to Cuba and the wider Caribbean? In this video, we examine the arrival of the USS Nimitz in Jamaica against the backdrop of growing tensions involving Cuba, the United States foreign policy, and Caribbean sovereignty. Is this simply a routine military visit, as some of you are suggesting? Or does it fit into a broader geopolitical pattern that Caribbean people have seen before? And that is the point. We have seen this before. We have seen this playbook before. We explore the history of U.S. military power in the Caribbean, previous confrontations involving Cuba and Venezuela, the strategic importance of Jamaica, and why many Caribbean citizens remain deeply skeptical of any military action against Cuba. Join the discussion and share your views in the comments. Do you believe the Caribbean would support or reject a U.S. invasion of Cuba? I think we would emphatically, for the most part, we would not want a military invasion of Cuba. The Caribbean is not desirous of a U.S. military invasion of Cuba. When the USS Nimitz arrives in Jamaica, and it arrived yesterday, might I suggest, at the same time that Washington is increasing pressure on Cuba, many Caribbean people will ask a simple question. Have we seen this playbook before? The Trump administration openly boasts of its success in Venezuela. Now, some analysts are warning that Cuba may be next. Is the Caribbean being prepared for another confrontation in the region? And that is what we are seeing, right? That is what we're seeing. And many people are still sleeping. Okay? So the US Nimitz, one of the Nimitz, I should say, not Nimitz, but Nimitz, one of the most powerful warships on Earth, is now in Jamaica. Arrived yesterday, and people are, should I say, I don't know if they're impressed, but they are watching, and they're watching in a very skeptical manner. For some, this is just another military visit. For others, it is a reminder that the Caribbean sits at the center of a geopolitical struggle that never truly ended and will never end. And for those paying attention to recent events, a troubling question emerges. Have we seen this playbook before? Have we seen this playbook before? But we tend to forget. And lest we forget, we are going to be destroyed. The Trump administration's strategy toward Cuba increasingly resembles the strategy that was used against Venezuela. Economic pressure, isolation, legal action against leaders, military signaling, as they did it for in Trinidad, okay? Public discussion of intervention, okay? And I was on, what's her name? Mrs. Kamala Person-Bissessor, and her support of Donald Trump. But look at how Kamala Person-Bissessor is so different from Andrew Holness in terms of their methods, their strategies, but it's the same agenda. Andrew Holness is agreeing with that military intervention, but he's not saying it out loud, right? And perhaps he doesn't too, but he's acquiescing. Perhaps Miss Kamala Person-Bissessor wasn't agreement too, but she had to also signal and postulate the sort of arrogance, US arrogance, if she wanted to maintain or remain in power. All right? According to a recent Associated Press report, even experts in Washington have acknowledged that the administration's Cuba's strategies bears similarities to the Venezuela model. The question is not whether the playbook is being used. The question is whether it will work. And my answer is yes, it is going to work. And let me tell you why I think it's going to work. Before we go further, let's examine the broader context. For years, Cuba has faced severe economic difficulties. Energy shortages have become common, blackouts have affected daily life, economic growth has struggled, the standard of living for many ordinary Cubans has deteriorated. Supporters of the Cuban government often point to sanctions as primary cause or as the primary cause. That's what many people will say. Oh, it's the primary cause. And if Washington had not imposed the blockade, the embargo, Cuba would have been better. But look at Jamaica, for example. Have we gone through embargoes? And look at the state of Jamaica. Okay? Look at the state of Jamaica. Critics point, and perhaps we could say also Haiti to a lesser extent, because I would say that, yes, Haiti has always been through an embargo, but not an official one. Okay? Critics point to the structure of the Cuban economy itself. Regardless of where one stands politically, the reality is that Cuba today is under enormous pressure. Now, compare that to Venezuela. When Washington intensified pressure on Venezuela, the country still possessed one of the world's largest oil reserves. Even under sanctions and restrictions, oil remained a strategic asset. Cuba does not possess that advantage. They're just struggling and they are not surviving. They're on the verge of a collapse. Of course, Trump's blockade has greatly affected that collapse. Energy is one of the foundations of national power. It fuels transportation, industry, agriculture, and everyday life. A country already struggling with energy shortages begins any confrontation from a position of weakness. That is why many observers underestimate the seriousness of Cuba's current situation. Okay? The arrival of the USS Nimitz in Jamaica must be viewed within this larger strategic picture. I remembered when the USS Gerald, what they call it, the USS Gerald, whatever. But perhaps I'm not remembering it, the name of that one. But when that docked in Trinidad in Port of Spain, many people were suggesting to the same thing that is happening in Jamaica. Oh, it's just here for a military show, a military spectacle. It's not about Venezuela, right? It's just two countries, in their bilateral agreements, okay? And the United States trying to cooperate with Trinidad in terms of protecting its shores. That is what they say for the Goyim, for the people who are very naive. But those of us who follow geopolitics and we understand history, we know that the USS Nimitz in Jamaica is much more than a spectacle, right? It is signal. It's signaling to Cuba that we are going to get you, right? The same thing they did to Maduro. And they snatched him away, they kidnapped him, and he's now in the United States facing legal charges. And the same thing is going to happen to Raul Castro. Okay? Aircraft carriers are not ordinary vessels. They are symbols of power projection. They represent the ability of a major power to operate far from its own shores and influence events across an entire region. Now, do I want this to happen? No, but it is happening. And this is what I would like many people to understand. Wanting something to happen, there are many things happening in my life, or many storms in my life that I didn't want to happen, but they are happening and I have to deal with them. I have to admit that this is the reality. You have to deal with it, and many of you don't want to deal with the reality. You'd rather live in a world that is artificial, and the world in which we live is artificial. And until the real dose of reality hits you, you won't understand the world in which you live. No one is claiming that the arrival of the USS Nimitz automatically means military action is imminent. Okay? But military deployments send messages. So it might not happen today, but it could happen next week, could happen next month. Governments understand those messages, military planners understand those messages, and the populations understand those messages. And by the way, there's a high-level military personnel who will be visiting Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic, this Friday. So all of these things, the same thing happened before Maduro was captured, right? When I think he was Dan, the guy, some high military official that went to Trinidad and came also and went to the Dominican Republic because they were, both nations were planning that sort of, undertaking. The Caribbean has seen great powers operate in the region for generations. From interventions and occupations to economic pressure and diplomatic campaigns, Caribbean history is filled with examples of external powers shaping regional outcomes. So we don't really control what happens here. We don't really control. The Mia Motleys and the Kamla Person Predecessors and the Andrew Holises and the Irfan Alis, these are just stooges for the global power system. Okay? And that is what you have to understand. This is why many people across the Caribbean are deeply skeptical whenever major military assets appear in the region during periods of rising political tension. The Caribbean people have their own interests. Many do not want to see another conflict in the region. Many do not want to see, particularly after what happened in Venezuela, many do not want to see Caribbean territory used as a staging ground for actions against neighboring states. Many believe that disputes involving Cuba should be resolved through diplomacy rather than force, and that is what should be done, but it is not being done because we have a military aggressor in the form of the United States who, or which I should say, is actually fulfilling biblical prophecy. That the lamb-like beast is going to cause the entire world, not just some, the entire world to wander after the beast. So whether it's in Iran or it's in Iraq or it is Russia, it is China, this system is going to cause this beast-like nation, lamb-like started out, but eventually transitioning to a dragon is going to cause the entire world, not just some. This is why I say the Caribbean rejects a US invasion of Cuba. Not because every government would necessarily take the same position, but because ordinary Caribbean people understand the consequences of instability. They understand what happens when major powers turn small regions into a geopolitical battleground. At the same time, rejecting military action does not mean ignoring reality. Let me repeat that. At the same time, rejecting military action does not mean ignoring reality. The reality is that it is going to happen now, whether you like it or not. The reality is that Cuba faces extraordinary challenges. The reality is that Washington appears determined to increase pressure. And the reality is that the strategy being used today bears similarities to the strategy previously used against Venezuela. Whether one supports or opposes those policies, the stakes are enormous. The future of Cuba matters. The future of Caribbean sovereignty matters. And the choices made in Washington, Havana, Kingston, and across the region will shape Caribbean politics for years to come. So what do you think? Is the USS Nimitz presence in Jamaica merely routine? Or is the Caribbean witnessing the early stages of a larger geopolitical confrontation? Which I think that is what we are now heading for. Let me know in the comments below if you enjoyed the presentation, the analysis. Please like, subscribe, and share this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Make sure that you like and you share. Share the video so that people can get to hear these critical assessments of what is happening in the region. Just too many reactionary videos, and I'm not saying nay. But at the end of the day, a lot of us are living in a delusional world. We're not living in the reality. And you can live in your ideology and talk about black people don't like white people and white people. At the end of the day, these powers that be, may I suggest, may I inform you, may I humbly teach you and tutor you that the powers that be do not care if you are black or you're white. They will uproot your life. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you. Thank you for watching.